I cut my aquarium maintenance in half by solving a few annoying problems that have been wasting my time for years. Chances are you've been putting up with those same problems too, and the solutions are surprisingly simple. Black beard algae is probably the worst algae you can get in an aquarium. If you've been in this hobby for a while and you've never had to deal with it, consider yourself lucky. Because once it gets into your tank, getting rid of it can be a nightmare. Almost no algae eater wants to touch it because as BBA grows, it traps minerals, making it less appealing than softer types of algae. You might be wondering what this has to do with maintenance. Well, a lot. If you have black beard algae, a big part of your maintenance routine becomes cutting affected leaves, scraping rocks, and trying to keep it from spreading. There are ways to slow it down. One thing that has helped me is keeping my filter clean. Black beard algae can take advantage of the dissolved organic waste coming out of a dirty filter before that waste is fully broken down by the aquarium. So cleaning your filter regularly can make a noticeable difference. But even then, you are usually stuck removing it by hand over and over again. That's why I was so excited when I tried the Florida flagfish. I've heard other people in the hobby recommend them for years, but I had never actually tried them myself. So I added a few to the aquariums outside, and the difference has been very noticeable. I've actually watched them actively picking up black beard algae, something I've never seen another fish do. I'm not saying they'll completely clean up an aquarium that's covered in it, but if you remove as much as you can by hand first, then let the flagfish work on what's left, they can make a huge difference. Instead of continuing to fight black beard algae for a month, you might only have to keep up with it for another couple of weeks before it's finally under control. And as a bonus, they are beautiful fish too. I knew from very early on that I was eventually going to need an RO system. My tap water just wasn't consistent enough for the kind of aquariums I wanted to keep. The first RO system I bought worked pretty well, and I used it for a long time, but there was one thing I hated about it. Every time I needed to replace one of the cartridges, I had to disconnect the RO tubing from the top and the bottom of each stage. Mine has a sediment filter, a carbon filter, the RO membrane, and a DI cartridge. Every replacement meant pushing tabs, pulling tubing out, putting everything back together, and trying not to make a mess. Since I kept my RO system under the kitchen sink, it was a lot worse. I had to take everything out from under the sink just to get enough room to work. Because it was such a hassle, I kept putting it off. Most of the time, I didn't realize the cartridges needed replacing until I noticed my TDS wasn't dropping the way it should after a water change. And by the time I noticed, my plants were already struggling. Eventually, I switched to an RO system that uses twist-on cartridges. And guys, I wish I had done it years earlier. Some of them even let you write the installation date right on the cartridge, so it's much easier to keep track of when it's time for a replacement. And when that day comes, you simply shut off the water, twist the old cartridge out, twist the new one in, and you're done. You don't have to disconnect any tubing, no more fighting with fittings under the sink. It turns a job that I used to dread into something that only takes a couple of minutes. If you're planning on buying an RO system or replacing the one you already have, do yourself a favor and get one with twist-on cartridges. It'll save you a lot of time every single time you have to replace them. If you're finding this video valuable, remember to like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and get to more people who love this hobby. I've always liked fertilizers that let you control each nutrient individually. If I think a plant needs a little more potassium, I can add potassium. If I want to reduce nitrogen for a while, I can do that too. I like having that level of control because it lets me adjust things rather than changing everything at once. The problem is that the fertilizer I like the most came with measuring cups instead of pump dispensers. At first, that didn't bother me too much. But once I started adding more aquariums, it became one of the most annoying parts of my maintenance routine. Some tanks needed a full cap, others needed half a cap, some only needed a quarter of a cap. Measuring all of that over and over again every week took much longer than it should have. It actually got to the point where I stopped using that fertilizer, even though I really liked the results. I switched to something simpler because it was faster to dose, but I lost the ability to control each nutrient individually. Lately, while trying to solve a few fertilizing issues in my outdoor aquariums, I realized I really wanted that control back. So I finally decided to solve the problem instead of working around it. The trick is finding the right pump dispenser for your bottle. Most of them use two numbers. The first one is the diameter of the bottleneck, measured across the outside of the threads, not just the opening of the bottle. The second number identifies the thread type. Once I figured out those two numbers, finding the right pump was incredibly easy. Then there was one more thing I wanted to figure out. I wanted to know exactly how much each pump was actually dispensing. So I filled the pump with water and pumped it into one of the fertilizer measuring cups until it was full. That told me exactly how many pumps were equal to one cup. For mine, 2 pumps equal one full cup. So now, instead of trying to measure quarter cups and half cups every week, I just count the pumps. Fertilizing all my aquariums is much faster, and I can finally go back to using the fertilizer that gives me real control. I know I've mentioned before that I usually use a TDS meter after water changes instead of testing GH every time. Since I'm using RO water, I already know exactly what minerals I'm putting back into the aquarium. So as long as I keep my TDS around the same number after every water change, it's been a very reliable way for me to keep things consistent. But every once in a while, I still want to know the actual GH, even more so if something doesn't look quite right. Maybe the plants aren't growing the way they should, or maybe a shrimp or snail is telling me something is off. When it gets to that point, I end up using a drop test. And if I'm honest with you, I don't like them. You have to add one drop, shake the tube, look at the color, add another drop, shake it again, and keep doing that until the color changes completely. The problem is that, at least for me, it never felt like the color changed all at once. It slowly started changing with every drop. And when I looked at the tube from the side, it was really hard to tell exactly when that final color had been reached. That made it hard to feel confident in the result. That was until I started reading them the right way. Instead of looking through the side of the tube, extend it on a white piece of paper and look straight down from the top. We are looking through a much deeper column of water, so the color becomes much easier to see. If you've been struggling to figure out exactly when the color changes, give this a try. I think you'll be surprised how much easier it is to read. Fighting an algae problem can be one of the most frustrating things in this hobby. In a perfect world, you never have to deal with algae, but that's just not how this hobby works. No matter how much experience you have, sooner or later, you'll run into something new. That's what happened to me with the aquariums I have outside. There are so many different factors compared to the aquariums inside that I've been dealing with some algae problems. Hair algae is one of them, and if you've dealt with hair algae before, you already know how quickly it can take over an aquarium. While you're trying to fix whatever caused it, you still have to remove it. The best approach is to remove as much as you can by hand first, then let your algae eaters take care of whatever grows back while you solve the real problem. I've tried a few different ways of removing it. I tried using a bristle brush, it worked, but it also wrapped around my stem plants and ended up breaking quite a few of them. I also tried using hoses and vacuums. Those work too, but I eventually found a method that's even faster. I just use my hand, literally, and I'll show you how. First, don't do this unless your plants are already well rooted. If they are still establishing themselves, you just pull them right out of the substrate. Once the plants are rooted, slide your hand underneath the algae and gently pull it outward. Try to come up between the stems instead of pulling directly on top of them. Keep pulling until your hand is above the top of the plants. Only then should you start wrapping the algae around your finger. If you start wrapping it while you're still down in the plants, you'll end up grabbing the stems too, and you'll either break them or pull them out. Hair algae sticks to itself surprisingly well. Once you get a good clump started, a lot of it will come out together. But don't let that clump get too big. If you notice it's pulling too hard on your plants, tear that clump off, throw it away, and start another one. A smaller clump puts a lot less force on the plants and is much easier to control. If you do it this way, you can remove almost all the hair algae from an aquarium in just a few minutes. It has become by far the fastest and easiest method I've found. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these tips do you find the most useful? Let me know down in the comments. And if you have another little trick that saves you time during aquarium maintenance, share it with the rest of us.